Okay, so I'm here with Silvia, my good friend Silvia, and Silvia's just finished organizing a gathering in Portugal, and I thought it could be interesting to talk about that. But my thought was to like rewind the clock a couple of years back, because I'm kind of making the argument that Twitter is a dating app for making friends, and that there's an opportunity to use this social media platform not for having annoying arguments. Or just like looking at people's dinner or something, but actually to form meaningful friendships and working collaborations and make a good livelihood and, be on a spiritual path and whatever, like that a good life is accessible through Twitter. So I thought it could be interesting to like rewind the clock. You and I met, I think like 2 years ago. We are having a conversation because we both had small businesses and we were just like exchanging advice and tips. And I suggested at some point you should get on Twitter. And then something happened. And then now it's 2 years later and you're organizing gatherings for people who all met each other on Twitter to spend time together. And like, I think you're doing a lot of your business through Twitter, and you're like, initiating this like very meaningful community experience. So I wanted to get just some of the story, the moments in the story that build up to this, because my ideal outcome was that other people could follow along this conversation and get some sense of like, oh, right, like this is how I can find my way into meaningful relationships and meaningful collaborations. I don't know how achievable or repeatable it is, but maybe hearing some of your story will at least be inspiring. So if you rewind the clock in your head, what happened?
I don't think you even suggested that I would go on Twitter. You were just there. And I was like, oh, what's Rich doing there? And I just started following people that you were following. And then I eventually started interacting a little bit. And it was fun. And it took me a moment to, like a couple of months to actually start making friends. But one of the things that kind of marked my beginning of using Twitter more extensively and meeting people was Yatard reached out to me to have a call at some point, and I was like, oh, you can do that, that's so exciting. So he was the first person I called on Twitter, and from then on I kind of started having calls with people, and I was like, oh, I can actually do that, just choose someone that I whose vibe I like and ask them to have a call with me. So I started doing that. And then at some point I came across Visa's Do 100 Thing challenge, and I decided to post 100 drawings, make 100 drawings and post them on Twitter. And I started doing that, and people started enjoying them. And eventually someone asked me if they can commission something from me. And I said yes, and they really liked it. And then people started commenting on my drawings, and they enjoyed them, and I was like, oh, I can actually do this as a full-time job, and I would like that a lot. So I started doing that, and Twitter became like the place where I make friends online, and also where I make money online, which sometimes it's still a little bit of a tricky line to navigate, because I want to be myself, and I want to be friendly, and I want to be playful, but also I want to have clients. So it's been a very interesting challenge to find a way to earn money in a way that I still feel like it's basically my friends want to buy stuff from me, and they want to commission stuff from me. So it's really amazing that I have these relationships where we are first friends, and then we collaborate on something, or they commission something from me, or like someone wants to do a vibe trade with me. Vibe trade is this thing that I do where it's like I have a call with someone, and then I make a piece of art based on their vibe. So it's like a portrait, but instead of their face, it's their vibe. And then I've met a lot of people I became friends with through that. So it's like a very mixed between making friends and also earning a living from there. And eventually I discovered the Lisbon crew on Twitter. and I started hanging out with them. And then that's how I started to transition from Twitter and calls into in real life presential meeting people. And then a few people were passing by Portugal to visit, and I met them. And then Jess Camp happened. So Jess organized this meetup in February, end of February. And I met a lot more people through that. And then after that, I just started meeting more and more people, and also forming some sort of a, let's say, a congregation in microsolidarity terms around the Portugal area. And this is what led me to organize Catalyzbon, the meetup that we just had now. So that was the first one I organized. And maybe there will be more.
So it just sounds like this process of escalation from like reading Twitter, interacting on Twitter, sending people private messages, getting on a call, meeting physically, like a few people at a time, and then having events that are like multi-day.
Yeah.
People come together. And then I assume the next steps beyond that in terms of escalation are like start a commune, make babies, start a business together, launch a space program.
Yeah, I think there's people in this, this circle of like this part of Twitter who are already getting started on those things. And it's very fun to watch and participate in that.
Maybe when we're not recording, I want to know who's making babies.
Yeah, that specific part I'm not sure, but
that's my key performance indicator for an effective gathering.
I'll let you know if I hear anything.
So okay, we're up in the present. You've just done Catalyzbon. So now I want to know really like the practical stuff, like how many people, how big was the space, where were people sleeping, how much did it cost, how do you manage the finances, like just speak to the event organizer in me.
So wait, let me think about all the questions you asked. You asked how many people. So there were 31 people. The space was, so there was one main venue that had space for 26 people, and then another smaller one just like very close by for like overflow people. And also that we kept as a, if someone suddenly had COVID, or if something happened and someone was having a bad time, there was this other extra place that they could go to.
Can you tell me about the space?
The space?
Like, what style of place was it?
So it was an Airbnb. So the thing, like we booked this space, and we booked the gathering for one of the worst weekends in Portugal, because there's this big festival happening. So everything else was booked. So this was kind of like the only choice that I found. But it turned out to be a really cool place. So it's this, it was through Airbnb, and it was this big warehouse that was turned into accommodation. So it was a very, very big space with 8 bedrooms, and people were sharing bedrooms. There was one with 6 people, most of them were 3 people, and some with 2 people as well. And there was a kitchen, there was a big hanging out lounge area, and it was a little bit out of town, but you could just take an Uber or a bus to go to town. And it was in a relatively industrial area, so you could make a lot of noise. And it was a really cool space, and I think people liked it. And it was kind of a risk, because I just booked it and I never went there to see it, because I wasn't in Lisbon until like just before the event. So I just arrived there the day of the event, and it was just like, okay, let's see what this looks like. And it was actually very cool.
So I'm always curious about these like very practical things, because they present like an obstacle to someone else. It's like, where do you find a venue? So Airbnb, great. And then what about the financial side? Like, how much risk were you up against when you booked it?
So I had people pay beforehand. So what we did, I organized this with Mage, Mycelium Mage on Twitter, and we decided, we just had the idea like, oh, let's do this thing. And there's a few friends that we have that are already in Europe, and some of them that are probably going to be traveling to Europe. So let's check interest first, and let's contact those friends first, and ask them to just, transfer us the money if they want to participate. And then if we don't have enough people, we had a minimum of 15 people that we needed in order to cover the costs of the space. So we waited until we had that many people, until we booked the venue. And then, so there was no risk really. And then we booked the venue, and then we filled the rest of the spots. Yeah.
Sweet. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did it all just like personally through my account. So we didn't have any profits, and it was very unofficial. It was just like a bunch of friends going to an Airbnb, and I'm the one who pays for it. Yeah,
it's like a friends weekend together. It's not a business thing.
Yeah.
I've just started an open collective for micro solidarity, and I'm extremely happy with it. And I think it could be a really useful model for other people that are like wanting to go one step beyond what you just did. If we're going to do this every 6 months or something.
Yeah.
That makes it legal, but also very efficient and very transparent and straightforward. And it's like, because it's transparent, it's not like, oh, we trust Silvia, here's all of our money. It's like, no, here's our collectively owned pot of money, and we can all see it. We can see what's coming in and what's going out. And that feels really like futuristic and simple. So then we got the space. Then what happened? Like, how much, what's your role? I mean, your role, you've been convening, so you're doing this, like privately contacting people who you want to be with and inviting them in. And then they're there. What kind of responsibility do you have for the experience while they're there?
So this was something very interesting, that it was not very intentional, but it kind of ended up happening that way, and it felt like the best way, which was, since this is like a not for profit thing, it's just a bunch of friends coming together. What I decided to do was, okay, I was the one who booked the space and like did the pre-event thing. So now we are all here together, and everybody's responsible for this experience, and we're all going to create it. So from the beginning, we try to set this expectation that everybody's responsible for it. Like, if you want to organize something, if you want to do there was no schedule, but there was an invitation for, like, if you want to do a workshop or a session or something to offer to the group, you can do it, and we're all going to come together and like come up with a plan, or like the best way possible to like combine everything. And everybody's responsible for cooking and cleaning dishes and taking the trash out and keeping the space nice, and also to take initiative. Like, if there's something in the space that could be better, like if that couch would be better over there, or if we could have an extra area here for, I don't know, be more cozy or for play, just go and do it and see how other people feel about it. So I try to have as little practical work during the event, so that I could always be available for people to come to me with ideas, to just be a sounding board and to just solve problems that were coming up. So for example, with cooking, we just ordered a bunch of food for the whole time, and then each day I asked for a chef, like someone to be the chef, and they were responsible for dinner, and they would find their own crew. They were like asking people who would like to help them in the kitchen to be the cooks, and they would come up with a meal based on the ingredients that I had bought, and I had nothing to do with the kitchen, just finding who would be the chef. So there was a lot of that kind of thing happening, where I tried to take as little responsibility for the things themselves, like the workshops. There's this specific workshop happening at that specific time, but I know nothing about it. If you want to know about it, you go talk to the person, and if you want to do something else or collaborate, you go talk to the person, and you do that together. And it worked really well.
That's really inspiring. I'm so used to doing it the other way, where it's like really explicit hosting. There's a structure, there's a plan, there's like people are paying because they're going to receive some kind of, like when we do a training or something like that, where it's like, yeah, they've set time aside in their calendar to go and learn a bunch of skills, and I've got to deliver that training. It's like a really different mentality. And I talked with Jess after she organized Jess Camp, and she described something very similar, and I'm like, whoa.
I basically learned this from Jess because I was at Jess Camp and Jess was doing it this way, and I was like, oh, you can just do this. You can just create an empty space for people to put building blocks on top of it and like create it together. And because I already had that, like I just copied a lot of things from what Jess had done at Jess Camp. And then because I didn't have to think about those things, I could build on top of that. Like, okay, now we can actually ask people to take initiative to do activities that they might want to do, things that they might want to offer. And it feels like every time we do it now, we can add a new layer on top because we can learn from the experience of the person who organized it before, and some things will be automated and happen much more easily, and people will already be tuned into that idea of the fact that we are creating this together, and there's this kind of super organism that needs different things at different times, and people can just tune into that and like bring those pieces down and take action and make them happen.
So that one layer there is inspiring about this like self-organizing system where everyone's contributing and no one has to have like a really explicit responsibility for the whole. But then there's the other layer, which is, well, Jess started it and now you're doing it, you and Mage. So like, what was that? What's the connection there? Like, was there an explicit succession, or was it just like an emergent? Was there a fight? Did you steal it off Jess?
No, Jess didn't want to organize it. I wanted another gathering to happen in Portugal, and I didn't really want to organize it, but like no one else was gonna do it. So I was like, you know what, I'll just do it myself. And yeah, that's how. And Major and I were talking about that, and we just decided, okay, let's just make it. And Jess was there like throughout the whole time, and she was like this invisible helper that like she was always there, and I would always ask her questions, and every time I had some problems or doubts, I would ask Jess. And so yeah, she was very much a part of it, and her help was invaluable. And so yeah, she didn't want to organize it, so I did it. And also another thing about succession was that Jess Camp was open to everyone to join. It was like published and people could just get a ticket. And this one was different. The initial idea was for it to be open, but we just started thinking, oh, there's these people that we would really like to have there. So let's send them an invitation first, and then after that, we'll open it to the public. But then pretty much all of those people wanted to come, and they ended up filling all the spots. And then there were a few spots left, but we were like, oh, we're not going to open it to the public just for these, few spots. So we might as well just keep it as something private. And because of that, we didn't want to call it Jess Camp, because like Jess Camp is kind of goes, it would go against the spirit of Jess Camp, which is something open to the public. And so it was like just something different. And yeah, I had a bit of an ethical dilemma because of that, but it was like, you know what, I'm making this, and this is how it ended up being, and that's fine. So it was not like a succession of, oh, there was a Jess Camp and then there was a Jess Camp too. That's why we called it Catalyzbon. It was a different thing.
I've got a bunch of different thoughts popping at the same time. One is that in micro solidarity terms, I say that leadership is the capacity to make a compelling invitation. So like the fact that you and Mage can make a list of people and say, I'd really love to spend time with you, and they all say yes. That's a peculiar kind of leadership that not everyone can do. It's like about basically having a critical mass of relationships and trust that people actually are like, oh, if you're organizing, it's going to be great. But this thing about, the ethical dilemma of the way that I hear it is like the dilemma of being exclusive and being like, oh, if this is about community, it's always a bit of a paradox to be excluding people, but it seems to be necessary as well. My my mission, I guess, is like this kind of event doesn't work with 3,000 people, you know. It just doesn't. You can't have the same experience. Like you're saying about, oh, we just asked a few people and they gave us some money and then we got the Airbnb. Like that doesn't scale beyond like 50 people.
Yeah.
And so you are going to exclude everyone else on the planet apart from those 50. And so like my mission is that, can we just show people how they initiate these, and like what is the hard part? Like what are the bottlenecks? What are the unique things that come naturally to you? And this is the same with Jess, right? She also makes compelling invitations. What is that capacity? How do we develop it? How do we show more people how to play that game? And then it's not like everyone has to come, because they can just start their own one in all different parts of the world, and we can all be remixing and learning from each other. So that makes me want to know more about your role, and maybe it's easier to think about what you saw Jess doing at Jess Camp. What was Jess's role at a more subtle level, like in a more energetic way, or like the interpersonal field vibes, like the stuff that is not about moving objects in space, but is more about how people feel around each other. Do you know what Jess was doing, or do you know what you have been doing to make this work?
Yeah, I thought about that a few times. And this is actually one of my intentions going into Catalyzbon, was the way how I was describing it when it was an intention was that I wanted to have this center in myself, moving through the whole thing without being like easily knocked down by things coming at me, and just like remaining centered and being able to rely on people around me, at least the team of closer people like Mage and Jess, to support me if things were more difficult. And to actually, this is something that I read on one of your tweets at some point. You wrote about, I think it was like this thread about what are some of the things that you should do when you're hosting an event or something like that. And one of them was, if you feel nervous or if you're like undecisive or there's like some tension, just make sure that you let out as little as possible of that, because people will pick up on that very easily, and then it will just move from person to person. So this was also very present for me as an intention to just trust everything and be there and be present to solve problems as they came. But it's like, if something happens, it's like, it's not a big deal. I have help. We all trust each other there, and I can be calm because I will make it much easier for me to solve problems as they arise. So yeah, I was a bit nervous before the event, and just like, oh, what are the possible case scenarios, things that can happen, and what if this thing goes badly, and what if this other thing doesn't work. And then as I arrived there, it felt like energetically I started feeding on people's good energy, and then I had more good energy to give, and they started feeding on mine. And what I was doing was, I even commented on this with a few people during Catalyzbon, was that I was pretty much moving through the space because it felt like everybody was taking care of everything, right? There were people cooking, there were people taking care of the space, there were people organizing workshops, there were people taking care of each other. Like every time someone was going through something more difficult, there was already someone there helping them and supporting them and telling me, hey, this person is going through a hard time, but I'm already supporting them. Is there anything else? Blah, blah, blah. So it felt like I could basically just move in the space, which was this big space where everybody was together, and just be radiating good energy, and just sitting next to someone and start playing music. And they asked me how I was feeling. I was just always feeling great, because everybody was just like so great as well, and feeling so good and doing things, and the thing was happening collectively. So I could just move and stand up to go to the next place and not know where I was going next, but just letting things come to me. And then there was always someone asking me, hey, can I do this thing? And I could just say, yeah, here's how you could do it. I don't actually have anything specific to do right now, so I can talk to you about it. And this was also something very interesting, which is sometimes people just like they had these ideas and there was space for their ideas to come up, and they just needed permission or like validation to be like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Why don't you do it? What do you need from me to help you make it happen? And just giving them permission to take full responsibility for it and gather whatever resources and help they needed and just make it happen. So I felt like a lot of it, energy wise, was just me moving through the space and feeling really good and radiating that to people, and sometimes just going to someone and hugging them and massaging them, or giving suggestions to their questions or offering help. And something that I learned from Jess at Jess Camp was something she did I really liked, was at the opening ceremony. So the only two things that she planned for Jess Camp was opening ceremony, free space, free space, free space, free space, closing ceremony. And I did opening ceremony. Then the next day, a meeting for us to co-create the schedule or like plan for the whole thing and see, who wants to create what and how can we make that all coexist in space and time, and then closing ceremony. But anyway, Jess at the opening ceremony said that she, she's done the work until now, and now she wants to be free to not do anything else and just enjoy until the end of Jess Camp, and then like come back again as an organizer at the end for exiting. And I was like, oh wow, that's so cool. I want to do something similar. And I wasn't ready to let go completely like that. I was still in charge. I was still doing things like going shopping and there to solve problems if people ask me, which Jess also was. But I feel like I was more, that intention for me wasn't as strong, but there was a little bit of that feeling there, which kind of created space for this feeling of everybody's co-creating this together, which is very much what happened at Jess Camp as well. Yeah, that's probably more, but that's what's coming up right now.
That's still a really useful description. I completely recognize it, and it's just cool to hear you describe how that works. I call it vibe hygiene, this thing of being intentional about what emotional residue you're leaving when everyone's attention is on you. It's like, obviously it's not like you should just bottle things up and pretend you're having a good time when you're not, but like when you're not having a good time, having a strategic way of dealing with that emotion rather than just like leaving a bunch of anxiety on people as you encounter them. Like people really start to shrink up. There was something you described that I wanted to just double click on as well, which was what I see as fanning the flames of someone's agency. I think it's so essential, like that everyone has agency, but a lot of people don't really know how to activate it. And it seems like there's a precondition, which is first of all a kind of trust to even admit that I have ideas, things that I would like that are different from what are currently happening, things that I might offer. I might invite someone to do a thing and they might not come. Like there's the kind of risk of that. So first, just to admit that exists is a threshold that needs to be crossed. And I think we help people over that threshold just by compassion and acceptance and just modeling like, hey, you're fine, I'm fine. Like you need that kind of critical mass. And then when someone actually vocalizes any kind of suggestion, again, being quite strategic and intentional about like, can I find a yes to this, regardless of what it is, even if it sounds like annoying or weird or not what I had in mind or, like awkward. Yes, how can I support you? And especially when it's people that don't have a lot of experience with like initiating stuff, then I'm just like, can we just support you to get moving? Because for me, once you're moving, then you can do some course corrections. You can get feedback. You can be like, oh, that didn't really work, or that was way too loud and we got complaints from the people in the other workshop, or yeah, great, let's improve that next time. But it's so much better to adjust direction after you've started moving rather than like sit there in stasis and try and plan everything out perfectly before I make a move. It's like, you're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
I think that's also the do 100 things thing as well, right?
Yeah. And it goes very much against my tendency to do things. Like my tendency is to control and to like have the whole plan and then just try to follow it. And I noticed, like, I think this is the biggest learning curve for me during Catalyzbon, was to notice the moments when I was being like feeling it's kind of it's contracting. I need to hold on to this and like plan and like predict. And it was very funny because at the end of the planning of the workshops, basically everybody came up with their own ideas, and I was just trying to hold a space and guide things to be all organized together, to basically have a thing on the wall where we have 3 days and this thing goes here, this thing goes here, this thing goes here. These two things are similar, so maybe these two people can do it together. And at the end of it, I didn't really know when to let go. And I was looking, okay, so now it's fine. You know, some things don't really have specific times. Some people didn't fully plan it yet, but I'm just going to leave it on the board and say, hey, there's these things happening. If you want to participate, don't talk to me, talk to the organizers of the workshops. And then I was like, okay, so maybe I can make the board nicer now. And maybe some things don't have times yet, so I can go there and write it. And then someone there looked at me doing it and they're like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm just making the board nicer, you know, and organizing things. And they were like, hey, you're great at doing this thing, like organizing at this level, but it's okay to let go. And I'm like, oh, yeah, thank you. I will. I'll just leave it there. I'll take a picture, post it on the group chat, and just let it be. So there are a lot of those moments of me tensing up, just like, oh, people are taking this bed outside to chill at night. And I'm like, oh, what if they, you know, spill drinks on the bed? Or, and then just be like, oh, what's the worst thing that can happen? It's like, there's drink spills on the bed and we'll have to pay for cleaning or whatever, and that's it. It's fine, it's okay, let it happen. And just constantly noticing those things and having people that I could talk to about, like going to Jess and saying, hey Jess, I'm feeling this thing about this thing that's happening, and you have experience with organizing. I just want to tell you this. You don't have to tell me anything. I just want to have someone to talk to about the organizing level of things, and to vent to, and to just say whatever, and then, oh, actually that's not that bad, and just tell me that I'm doing well. Sometimes it's like having someone there to like validate you and say, hey, you're doing great, and there's this thing that you could do maybe, and this is how I would do it. You're doing great, keep going. This was just so important to have those kind of people there as well.
In case it's not obvious, I want to be clear that the example of the mattress going outside and maybe getting damaged, it's not just about the mattress. It's like a whole attitude towards life, right? Like this practice of whatever comes our way, we have the resources we need to deal with it. And nothing's going to be gained from like pre-controlling everything and mapping out all the possible outcomes. Like that's just such a, it's an orientation that you can take towards life. And these are the kind of opportunities to practice it, is with these like simple things about the mattress.
For sure.
I notice I want to make this conversation about me for a second.
Go Rich.
And then we'll come back, right? So basically, from talking with Jess and then talking with you, it's making me think twice about my approach to events, which is so much more predefined. And I certainly have, like, I'm really aware of my tendencies to be a control freak, you know, like to want to manage every possible thing. And at the best side of that, that means we produce really high quality experiences that are like, everything is in its place and there's a kind of craftsmanship to it, which I love. But on the downside, it's like, it sucks up all the opportunity for people to activate their own agency. And so already with the next gathering that we're doing, I've taken some steps towards making it much more open and less structured, which feels fine. But the big break for me that feels like a bottleneck, at least the story I'm telling myself, like the reason I can't just let go of control the way that you two have, is about the business model. Because if a bunch of friends are getting together for the weekend and there's minimal structure, just enough to help people self-organize and to have a great experience and to learn from each other, I have a hard time putting us a decent ticket price on that and taking a profit, that I say, this is my job. I'm paid, you know, for a weekend like that or something. I want to leave with a few grand. Like if it was my corporate clients, some of our clients, we can charge like 5-figure days, you know? And it's like, well, obviously that's not appropriate, but is some profit appropriate? Where I'm currently at is like, well, the actual event itself is going to be mostly self-organized, but there's going to be more kind of lead-in activities online beforehand and more support afterwards, so that the community's got this, like, there's like a real membership community experience where you're going to keep having encounters with each other. There's continuous facilitation. And so that feels like a value add that I'm willing to charge people for, because it's like people can see I'm taking responsibility for this multi-month journey rather than just this weekend. And so that feels better about charging, but I'm still like inquiring into the myth of like, yeah, am I just making it up that people are not willing to pay for, I mean, sometimes there's a risk aspect as well. So like some venues, you're going to have to put up 10 grand just to get the venue as well. So there's like that. I feel good about being paid for taking a risk. But yeah, I just want to get your take. Like, how do you feel about getting paid for this work? And do you think people would be willing, you know, like if all of those people added $100 to the ticket, you would have left with 3 grand. And how would that feel? And would people be up for it? And then what if it was $300 and you had 9 grand and you shared it around with a few people, you know, those kind of questions.
So one thing that was coming up as you were saying that was a question when you mentioned would those people pay if there's less structure? And the question is, what are people paying for? Like, what do they really want from the event? And from what I gather from Catalyzbon was, and maybe I'm wrong because I didn't talk to everybody, but this was exactly what people wanted, like a space to just meet and be all together. And I would feel good charging more, because it took a lot of work just to bring people together, to do the preparation, to invite people, to book the venue, to think about logistics, to be there to answer questions, to be there to create the space. It's like, it's not like I didn't do anything in the space. I was always present, like I was always there and always attuned to what was happening around me, and I was always available, and that is something. And I think the kind of people that we want to do this for are aware of that. It's something that is not always visible, but I think to these people, I think it is visible. People were telling me that, you know, the event was that good because of my presence, because I was so chill and so grounding and so relaxed all the time, that they could also relax around me. And I think this is worth something. And I think you probably have that as well. But yeah, I think it comes back to the question, like, what do people want? What are they actually paying for? And I would pay for that. And it makes sense to me to do it. I didn't charge for it because, well, it was the first time I was doing this, and I felt like I wanted to have more freedom to experiment with less risk of like disappointing people. And it's like, hey, I'm not profiting. Basically, I'm charging you for accommodation and food. So whatever happens, it's because of all of us. We are doing it together. Which is also interesting, because if I would charge, then even if I would do exactly the same thing, it would add the expectation, right? Like there's going to be a certain level of quality. And then because of that, things would probably be different, even if it was just completely open. So I don't know, like my intuition is to say, yes, this is something very valuable to do for people, to organize this kind of thing and just bring it all together and create the container and be like, here it is. Now you can do whatever you want with it. And I'm going to be here to support you in taking the initiative to do whatever you want with it and communicate with other people, but not have like a schedule. Yeah, I don't know. Does that Does that give you something?
It does. I'm wondering how ready you are to charge for the next one, to take a profit on the next one. Because it's easy for you to give me advice, but I want to know how it actually lands for you.
Well, I didn't even start planning to do a next one yet. There are already people who are taking charge and doing that. Like from Catalyzbon, there's already 2 other events that are planned. Another one for this summer and another one for next summer. And it's other people who are doing it. So it's like, oh, I don't even need to do it myself, because basically, I think this is also where our situation is different, because this is what you are doing for a living. So you want to make these spaces happen. And for me, it's just like, I want this space to happen because I want to be there and participate. But since no one else is doing it, I'm going to have to do it myself. And then hopefully, as it happens, other people will be like, oh, this is actually not that hard. I can do the next one. And then I go to the next one. So I think it's also different motivations. So I'm not really planning to organize a next one because they're already happening and what I want is to participate. But if it would be happening, I don't know. This time we charged, so it was 4 nights, and for the people who booked earlier and like helped us cover the risk, it was 200, and then people who came later was 300. So next time, I don't know, I'm just kind of coming up with numbers right now on the spot, but yeah, it's what you said, even if it's like 100 extra per person, which for 4 nights and food included wouldn't be obscene, it would already have like give us a profit of 3,000. So that sounds reasonable.
Yeah,
it sounds fair.
Yeah, it's you're right, it is different because it's my job, and I'm like, I mean, one of the things I already have shifted my attitude a bit towards, like, some events are more about community building and less about getting paid, you know. I do, both in my own experience and from speaking with more experienced community organizers, I have heard this repeating theme of like, there has to be a business model, in the sense of like, one of the things that we really lack in the world, I think, is basically hosting capacity, like people who have the practical and the emotional skills to like bring these kind of events together and hold community together. And one of the reasons we lack hosting capacity is because it's under-resourced, and like we can go into why that is, but I think feminism has done a good enough job of explaining that. But like, you've just done this thing voluntarily because it's like a temporary thing. It's like, oh, I can kind of fit this into my life and I'm willing to make that gesture. But you couldn't make that your full-time gig unless you figured out how to get paid. And so I'm just thinking about like other people organizing things like this, like whoever's starting the next one or the next one. On the one hand, it's generous of them to say, I'm going to volunteer and take this one, and you know, we do it the same way. But in another way, there's another kind of generosity, which is, I'm going to charge a profit on this so that my time is adequately repaid, so that it makes it more accessible to more different kinds of people that they can do that, you know. I'm thinking about all of the, like, some of the best community organizers I know are completely broke. And it's like, if you could just do an event like that every few months and get it like a decent lump sum of income, I just think it'd be so much more sustainable. I think there'd be more people doing it. And we've got, you know, it's like, if I'm going to see a life coach or a therapist, like, I'm not expecting my coach to bring a lot of content, you know, I'm expecting them to bring presence. And actually there's something about me paying them, which makes me pay attention more as well, and like makes me prioritize it. But we just don't have quite the same, I think we haven't quite got the language yet, or the frames or the patterns or the habits of like, oh yeah, this is one of those things, and this is one of those roles, and it's worth about this much. I think all of that is kind of missing. And so I'm like kind of saying all this, hoping that there's an audience out there who's starting to pay attention to the value and the time and the energy and the labor, and think about how those value flows so that it's sustainable and that it keeps going, you know?
Yeah, for sure. That makes perfect sense. And yeah, as you're saying that, I'm also noticing like probably a part of why also I didn't charge was that first, the previous event happening in Portugal I just organized, it was also like no profit. And also there's just this fear of charging people, just like some sort of shame or guilt that I am profiting from this. And also practically that I don't actually have a legal entity to host this from. It's just me doing it for my friends. So that's just, safer. But I totally agree with what you're saying. And yeah, it would be nice if people who do this could profit from it, because then there would be more people doing it and it would feel less risky also and more rewarding. And it's good to have this kind of thing happen. Also, on the other hand, if it's less official and if and I'm talking about like my case and people who are now organizing the other ones after me, not your case. You are doing a whole other level of community service, which is making the whole network happen and helping other people make it happen as well. But if you're just like me, and if you do like this one-off thing and then someone else does it afterwards, there's also the removing of pressure and expectation. If it's something you're doing for free, then it's okay if you fuck up, because there's some accountability, but it's like, oh well, I tried my best. I just organized this thing for us and I didn't get paid for it. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of both.
Okay, so a couple of things. One is on the legal structure. I want to be really clear how amazingly easy Open Collective makes it. Like just about anywhere in the world, well, not anywhere, but lots of Western places in the world, you can spin up a legal structure like almost instantly and have all that managed. And it's really, really simple. So that's a really good option. The other thing about, if people are not paying, it kind of lowers the expectations, or it lowers my sense of punishment for myself if I disappoint people. I also feel that, don't get me wrong, I feel the exact same thing, but it doesn't have the ring of truth about it. It smells a bit of bullshit, because it's like the consequence of people coming and having bad experience is their loss of trust in you and your loss of reputation, which is worth a lot more than a few $100,
Yeah.
And whether or not people are paying, you really are bringing your A game to like try and create an excellent experience for them. So I think it's just a cope because we're ashamed about money.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah. I think maybe it's not as much about doing a bad job, because like I was pretty confident that I was going to do a good job, and like I was really excited about it and I put all of me into it. It's more about the no structure thing. Like it gives me permission to experiment more and tell people, so you have to clean dishes, just if you see dishes dirty, just go there and clean it, or take out the trash, or do things. And I think if I was charging, there wouldn't be as much space for co-creation, unless I guess that's the premise of the thing, right? You're gonna go there to learn how to co-create something and how to listen to this collective thing that we are all doing here together. And for that, you have to participate and you have to do things and listen to whatever is being asked of you from this thing.
So that becomes a communication job. What you just did there is like, or what experience are you actually going for? You are there are some learning outcomes, like there are some sort of like value propositions, and we can get better together at naming those.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm wondering how much energy you've got left. I've got another 15 minutes of questions in me if you've got that in you.
Yeah, let's do it.
Another question that I am aware that we haven't talked at all about what happened. But I'm kind of okay with that, because what I'm interested in is like, what's the container and what skills people need to think about when they set up the container. And then all sorts of stuff has happened. It's going to happen. It's going to be different. Like I said, some people are going to make babies. Some people are going to start businesses. Like different stuff happens. If there's anything that happened that you really want to celebrate, that's good to hear. But I was going to take us in a different direction, which is about back to Twitter. So what I've been observing on Twitter, basically for the duration that you've been participating, is the sense of a scene or a network of scenes becoming self-aware, and different people, you know, like Visa's one of them, I'm one of them. Ashley from Dimmer Optimism is another one. People that are sort of explicitly saying, hey, pay attention to what we're doing here. This is a place to make friends. This is a place to get organized. And I'm seeing it, it feels like even in the last few days, it feels like it's reaching another stage of maturity. And there's been different events leading up to it. So Jess Camp, and then Vibe Camp, and then Catalyzbon. So those like actual events, physical events, different online courses that people go through together. I've put on a few online courses that have invited people in. So there's like been all these opportunities. So one of the things that I'm thinking about is, because like I said, I'm a control freak, I usually think in terms of organizations and boundaries and like policies and structures and like who's in charge of what and what's the business model and da. And that doesn't seem like the right format for this scene. But I do wonder how much coordination is required. Like maybe this is enough that we have conversations and we leave a residue and people can follow along if they want to. But I've been thinking about, for example, the relationship between Jess Camp and Vibe Camp. So on different continents, different scale, probably a different set of values and, you know, like priorities, but also very similar in terms of the audience that they're reaching. Audience is not the right word, participants, community, and a lot of the same sort of attitudes towards co-creation and so on. And I'm like, I would love it. And maybe that's what I'm doing already, is just like talking to these people and creating a kind of library of best practices, or like making sure that as you learn from Jess, someone else can learn from you when they're about to initiate that. So like I'm kind of doing that at the moment. But I'm wondering if it would be helpful if there were a more explicit kind of coalition of Twitter scene event organizers that were like actually meeting with each other and exchanging lessons. And the reason I say that is because I have a little fear that without that, what's going to happen is just the biggest players will just kind of define the whole thing. And that's likely Vibe Camp. And it seems like Vibe Camp's great. I haven't got a problem with that, but it just seems like not strategic to let the biggest, richest American thing set the tone for everyone. And I say that with no disrespect because I love all the people who are involved. But I'd rather see this like federated network of lots of different flavors that are all learning from each other. And I'm just curious your take on it, like how you see your, like, do you see yourself being a node in a bigger system, and how do you see those relationships? And yeah, what's your take on it?
I do see myself being a node in this network. I'm not sure. I feel some resistance to being an event organizer. I don't know if that's what I will always want to be doing. But then again, is there something else that could be like, what does it mean to be like a node in the network? Maybe that is it, just like a node that connects different people, in this case, in real life. I definitely like the idea of having smaller events, also because of, well, one, because of frequency, because I would like to have this happen in Europe. Right now, it seems like we have 3 major hubs: Lisbon, Berlin, and London. And I would like to see it happen regularly every few months. And you can't do that with Vibe Camp. I mean, maybe you can, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to have like over 1,000 people come together every 2 months and always the same people organizing that. It's just not going to happen. So one is frequency and the other one is intimacy, just having that small space with 20, 30, 40 people where you come together and build relationships with most of them over the course of those days. Also, the fact that I like that different people organize it. So yeah, I don't know if it would, I don't know what I think about having, like, let's say this event organizers guild, right, where the people who keep organizing it are talking to each other. I like the idea of different people taking initiative and doing it one after the other and sort of like passing the torch. But then again, I think it's never going to happen that everybody organizes events. I think some people will do it and some people will never do it, and some people will do it more. So the idea of having this, just like calling it guild, would be good for that, so that we're kind of thinking together. So like this kind of idea of this super organism, right, that happened during Catalyzbon, and we're all listening to it and just taking action based on what it needed. It could also happen between the organizers, just connecting with each other and seeing like, okay, so what could happen next? Who of us could do it, or who else could do it that we could, encourage to take action.
Mm.
And yeah, I definitely see myself as a part of it, because I'm already doing it. Like, I already did this, and now I want to be involved in this project of, like, with a few people. After Catalyzbon, we want to buy land and have a place to do events, and this is still like very much at the beginning, but I already see myself getting involved in other projects that are coming from this, not because I want to be an organizer, but because I want to see them happening. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. That's what my intuition is telling me as I hear it without thinking too much about it.
I think you said a couple of times collective organism.
Mm-hmm.
So
this is Malcolm's expression, the super organism, the collective consciousness. And I think just from hanging out with him, I started adopting that term of the super organism that has lots of moving parts and different consciousnesses that can tune into the higher consciousness of the thing as an entity and act from it.
For me, this is so crucial, this part, that there are multiple superorganisms at different scales, and that like a human is already a superorganism. That's this like many emergent levels of scale, from the like quantum up to the molecules, and then the cells, and then the organs, like, and then into the psychology of, we have these different parts, different characteristics, different archetypes, however you want to do that, like all within me, and then the relationship with other people. So then we're the superorganism of the group of 5 or the group of 30. And what I'm hoping to, like, what I keep inviting people in to see is, like, see how you're a part of a bigger whole, and that there are actually these articulated, defined boundaries all the way up and all the way down, like basically like this infinitely extending fractal in both directions. And so, like, okay, you've just done this thing with 30 people, that you're part of something bigger and amorphous. And I suspect that its development would be supported by putting in some boundaries. So, like, knowing that, okay, yeah, there's Jess Camp, there's Catalyzbon, there's Vibe Camp, they're all part of something, right? And then I just mentioned Doomer Optimism. That's part of something that's immediately adjacent, but there's a bigger circle that encompasses that. And what I'm holding with Micro Solidarity is like a really big circle, I think, that has capacity to hold a few hundred of these kinds of communities. And so I'm like kind of volunteering that space for anyone that's in this part of Twitter and doing these kind of events, is like, come and join our Discord. There's like good conversations happening in there now. Think about and learn and suggest and get advice on event designing there. And also saying, I think there's like, that maybe a too big circle, and there might be a smaller, an intermediate circle, which is like specifically, like you're saying, like the guild of Twitter event organizers or something, that someone, I can just see the need for it. And I'm like, I don't think I'm not gonna hold that. I'm just gonna point at the dotted line that I can see, and maybe someone will draw it in.
Yeah. Someone who will be listening to this conversation will be like, oh, I want to hold space for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope that's clear. I think you and I get it, but I wonder if we've lost people, or I'm hoping that no, they get it, and they're like, someone's getting activated right now as we speak. Yeah,
I think some people will get it for sure, and this is who this part of the conversation is for. So that's cool. And also, like, something that I was thinking about when you're talking about, the superorganism, and that it happens at different levels, like the self, and then small groups. And I think this is when people ask me about micro solidarity and what it is, I've explained it in many different ways over the time. And one of my favorite things about it that I notice myself telling people when they ask me what it is that you just point to things, like you just give names to groups and to how these parts can exist together in self, in dyads, in crews, in congregations. And even just pointing at that is so valuable. Like, since I heard about micro solidarity and what it is, it just changed the way I think forever. Just like implemented this frame in the way how I see things, and I see possibilities within groups. And yeah, I just wanted to bring that up, and like I'm so grateful for that. It's brilliant.
I appreciate the appreciation. I love some good appreciation, and that's very specific and good. And I also want to say, like, this is the flip side of the control freak. Like, I am learning how to be a good framer, you know, and it comes from listening and recycling and then being super opinionated and being like, now all those other things are out, this is in. And it's kind of disrespectful to everyone else's opinions, but this is in. And it works. And I know that it works because there's people in very different contexts that are resonating with it. But then when it comes to like organizing an event, for example, or hosting a community, I think that I know what's the right thing. Like my defense mechanism is like, oh, I know where the frame should be. You guys are ignorant. I'm the special guy. Like, it's really, it's a two-edged sword, right? Like, and it cuts both ways. So that's, I think my takeaway from this conversation is just leaning more into letting go and finding ways and strategies that I feel safe to let go, and that I'm going to be taken care of, and the group is going to be taken care of. I feel more ready to do that than I did an hour ago. So I'm really grateful for you and for Jess. You know, I think Jess has been the third person in this conversation all the way through as well, which is awesome.
Thank you, Jess.
Yeah. I feel wrapping up time. As I just named my takeaways, I wonder if there's anything that you're sitting with. Any last words, any plugs, any hanging questions, insights, weird faces?
Oh, one of the things that came out of Catalyzbon, so there were a few projects that kind of started there and now are happening. It's like 10, and one of them is the Booty and Hap Relief Fund. So that's still ongoing, and the limit was already reached, and it's still open, I think. So just wanting to lead people there if they want to contribute.
Our friend's house burnt down. There's a fundraiser. You can support it. I'll include the link.
Yeah. I think this is it. I guess one takeaway that kind of builds on top of yours, you said that you're more ready to let go. And I'm very happy to hear that. It's something I'm happy that this conversation brought you that. And another thing is, as you let go, rely on people around you, and just, I feel like another one of the big lessons in all of this for me is like, hey, I can talk to people. I can talk to you if I need something, and I know you're there, and I can talk to people around me when I'm organizing something, and just outsource stuff. And I hope this conversation will be that for people who want to do something, and that they also can reach out to us and learn from the things that have been said here before, because things have been done before, and there's people who have done the thing that you want to do, and you can probably find out the information. I think this is it. Thank you, Rich. This was very helpful for me as well to debrief. I hadn't talked about it as much since it happened last week, so I'm very happy. I'm great.
I'm great. I'm great.
You are.
I just scrambled a whole bunch of words together and it came out, I'm great. That's cool. I agree. And I'm grateful for your time and what you're contributing. I think it makes an enormous difference. We still haven't met in person yet, but I have met people who have met you in person, and I have felt the difference in them from having met you. So that makes me look forward to meeting you in person.
Soon.
Yeah. And on the debrief thing, I know it's very helpful, and I love doing it with people. So anyone listening, if you're organizing events, debrief with me. I would love to extract your lessons and share them around with the greater scene. For the superorganism, it needs its medicine. All right, goodbye, internet humans.
Bye.
And other non-human creatures that may be participating. The higher beings especially, you're welcome.